Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I am joined by the USA Today and Wall Street Journal best-selling author of the Detective Josie Quinn series, as well as several other crime fiction titles. Her most recent book, Remember Her Name, which is the 21st installment in the Josie Quinn series, came out this past Tuesday. It was already a Amazon Top 100 bestseller. That's right. It's your favorite writer of mine, Lisa. Oh, I forgot to ask you, Lisa Regan or Regan?
Reagan.
Reagan.
Yeah.
I never want to assume. It's Lisa Reagan, everybody. Hi, Lisa. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Yes, that was one of those questions I even thought about earlier today. I'm like, oh, I have to ask her this before we go live because
Everybody asks. Yeah.
sometimes there are some writers where I'm like, oh, it's pronounced, and then it's like, like a Joseph is Joseph Finder, not Finder, where you would think
Right.
it. So, yeah. Well, anyway, so welcome. Thank you so much for making time. We
Thank you
want
for
to
having
talk. We have a
me.
lot to talk about. Uh, at this point, I mean, your 21st book or the 21st installment of the series has come out. That is incredible. I would have to say most books in series don't probably go more than 10 books. So you're up to, I mean, I think you've almost reached the Jack Reacher series in terms of how many there are, or at least it's getting close. So before we get started, though, well, actually, to start, um, do you remember the very first thing that you wrote, creatively?
It was definitely a poem. I don't remember what, the particulars of it, but I definitely started with poetry. I was very, 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 very young. I would say 9 or 10 maybe. And so that's where I started. I just started writing, terrible poems that turned into unfinished short stories and then eventually a novel.
At what point did you get to, did you get to the stage where you attempted to write a novel?
Oh, I was 11. Yeah.
11? You wrote your first
Yes.
novel when you were 11?
11 and it was 140,000 words.
My God.
Yeah.
What was it about?
It was so silly. It, it was about these three uh young women from all different parts of the country, and they each get this letter saying that they've inherited this mansion on a cliff overlooking a bay. And so they all show up thinking that they've inherited this mansion when really I don't remember because I was 11, so I didn't really know anything about estate law, but um they had to kind of figure out whose house was it, why did they all get this letter, and then of course a killer shows up and starts killing people in the small town. So yeah, that's the crux of it.
At 11 years old.
Yeah. Yes.
How were you writing at that point? Was it like typewriter? Was it
Yeah.
just writing out longhand or
Typewriter.
computer typewriter? Do
Yeah.
you still have it?
I don't have that one. I don't know what happened to it. But eventually, I would say maybe about 10 years ago, my mom found an old typewriter somewhere at an antique store, I think, and she bought it for me. And so I do have that. So I have like to symbolize the typewriter I wrote my first novel on.
So okay, so 11 you wrote your first novel and then 100, and for people who don't, like, 100,000 words is like a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a lot for an adult to write, let alone 11-year-old. So what happened with it? I mean, what did you end up doing with it?
Oh, nothing. I still have those. I still have it somewhere. It's probably deep in a file cabinet here. When I got old enough, to really kind of understand publishing in just in the, barest sense, I went back to it and kind of looked at it. That's when I counted how many words were in it. Because the whole thing, I mean, it was inches thick. And I it was terrible, of course, but I felt like I had to keep it because it was kind of my start. And like as an adult, I couldn't believe that my 11-year-old self had pushed out that many words.
Oh, of course you had to keep it, but do you remember what it was called?
I think it was called Dark Summer or something like that. Yeah, it was really stupid.
Okay. Okay, well, so all right, so 11 already writing, like, doorstopper books. What happened at 12 years old? How many novels did you write when you were 12?
None. I don't know what happened between, I would say, 11 and maybe 15 or 16. I playing around with different ideas, but I didn't write anything cohesive. I didn't finish anything. Then word processors came out. And as a junior in high school, I started writing again, and I wrote three or four, maybe it was three, really, really horrific young adult novels that also have never seen the light of day. I had like friends in high school who read them, but that was it.
So what were you reading then back in like elementary, middle, and high school that, inspires you? I mean, not a lot of kids, take the time to write, again, a novel. I mean, yeah, they'll write some poems and short stories and maybe try to write novels, but I mean, what were you reading at that point that really gave you that bug that you wanted to give it a shot?
Well, early on, as an 11-year-old, I was reading, like Goosebumps and Christopher Pike, which I read him, well into adulthood probably. He started coming out with adult novels, and V.C. Andrews, which was so not appropriate for a 13-year-old. But I read like I started with the Flowers in the Attic series, and I can remember my friend who was a year older than me also was reading them. Her name was Melissa, and we're still friends now. And we used to sit on the phone at night for like 4 hours discussing these books, these V.C. Andrews books. So I just, those were my three big ones. I read Babysitter's Club and Sweet Valley High, Sweet Valley Twins, and all of those. But like I really loved Christopher Pike and V.C. Andrews, and I think because they were pretty twisted.
Well, so typically what I ask people is, was your first novel your first published novel? Now, granted, we have that answer. That was not the case because from what I could tell, your first novel was Finding Claire Fletcher, correct?
Yes, yes.
What number novel was that?
Ooh, that's so if you start with the first one I wrote at 11, and we'll say I really don't know if it's three or four that I wrote in high school. We'll say just three. So that's four novels. Then I wrote one really huge book before I wrote Finding Claire Fletcher because I had been starting all of these books and never finishing anything. And when I started that particular book, it was called The Space Between. And I told myself, I don't care if it ever sees the light of day, but I have to finish something. And so I finished that. So that would be five. So then full length novels, then Finding Claire Fletcher would have been six.
And so the first one that you had written when you were 11 sounds like it was a very like crime mystery, almost like Agatha Christie type thing. Were all this was like everything you wrote kind of the same type of genre, or were you writing stuff in other genres too, or at least trying to write in other genres?
I, so two of the young adult books I wrote were very crimey, and one of them was just like super depressing, was just like about grief. And then the one
It
that I
worked for John Green, so who
yeah,
knows? It could have worked for you.
the one I wrote when I was still in college in my undergrad was it was like my attempt at literary fiction with a little bit of magical realism and but of course it had bodies and missing people because I can't seem to stop writing that stuff.
So, okay, so Finding Claire Fletcher, that was the first one that you had published. What was that process like? Having written those novels in the past, what was it about? You feel like what was about this particular book that was that out with a pub? I believe it was Thomas and Mercer ended up republishing it, but who was the initial publisher?
There was a small publisher called Sapphire Star Publishing. They were the ones that picked it up first, and then they ended up closing a couple years later. And then I had the rights back. I put it out myself for a while, and eventually I had written a sequel to it, and I wanted to. I really love the sequel, so I wanted to, pitch it. All of my writing friends were like, "You should, approach a publisher about this." And so I had already had something published with Thomas and Mercer, so I just went back to them and said, "Hey, could you look at these two?" And I didn't think it was going to go anywhere because Finding Claire Fletcher had already been out. But they were awesome and they took them both.
Oh, so what was your first book with Thomas and Mercer?
It was Hold Still, which was actually my third published novel. And that I had put out by myself as well. And then one of the Thomas and Mercer's, one of their editors had read it and approached me and asked if they could pick it up. It had only been out for like a month
Yeah.
at that point.
Okay. Okay, so you wrote some books with Thomas and Mercer. You wrote it looks like, at least how it's listed on your website, the Claire Fletcher and Detective Parks mystery. There are two books in there. And
Mhm.
then the Jocelyn Rush books, there's two of
Yes.
them, and a standalone Kill for You. When did Kill for You come out?
That actually was first published by Sapphire Star as my second book, but it was called Aberration at the time. But like nobody could remember the title. So people were saying, "Oh, your book Apparition." Yeah, there's like all these A words, like nobody could remember the title. So when I got my rights back, I thought I'm going to give it something really simple that people will be able to remember more easily, and I republished it as Kill for You.
And then you have a short story too that's available, Over the Edge. Is that a standalone short story? Or does that tie into any of the other existing
So
IP, I guess?
it's a Jocelyn Rush story.
Okay.
Um, I think I had been asked to be part of an anthology with four or five other mystery writers. And so we all chose like a character from our books that were already out, and we just wrote a short story and then we combined them. And then eventually they took that anthology down. But I still had like this 30,000 word story that, I thought was okay. So, so I just put it out as a digital short.
30, okay, so it's you have a short story. It's a 30,000, so it's essentially a novella though, or we would even
Yeah,
say a short novel. I mean,
sure. No, I
they're
think it
Claire
was 30.
Keegan writes essentially short stories, and they call them novels. So we can say it's a short novel. It's
Yeah.
for marketing purposes. You should list it as a short novel, I would just say. We're getting a lot of love in the comments, by the way, for the Josie Quinn series, which again we are going to get to. There's a lot to discuss with that because obviously the very first book, Vanishing Girls, correct?
Yes.
That came out. What year was that again?
2018.
2018, and now we are in 2024. So quick math is 6 years, and you've just published the 21st book. Okay, so before we get into all that, because there's a lot to discuss with that, um, are you one of those writers who do you sit on an idea for a while, or do you just kind of get, inspiration strikes, you sit down, you start writing? Do you have to like outline, or do you just kind of let the story goes where it is, or a little bit of a hybrid, a little bit in between?
I used to just sit down and write whatever came out, but now not anymore. Now I'm more of a plotter. I do outlines, but a lot of times what happens is I'll come up with, or my editor and I will come up with a sort of premise. And when I say premise, I mean it's like a sentence or two, and then I'll kind of put that in the back of my mind, and it'll percolate for a while before I sit down and actually start uh, making notes and writing an outline. And the first thing I do is I just kind of vomit every thought that I have about that premise as to where it could go, what it might look like in execution, and I just label that notes. And I write all that out. And from there, I start to pick and choose things, and I start to actually write an outline as to, chapter by chapter, what the book would look like.
And was that all right? So can we go through the progression then? So you had these books with Thomas and Mercer, and then
Yes.
obviously the first Josie Quinn book came out with I know we discussed this Bookature. Is that how we're pronouncing it? Okay. So that was with a new publisher. And I don't know, can you talk about that transition? I mean, was that something where just Thomas and Mercer just, I mean, was that something that you had written and showed Thomas and Mercer and they just were like, nah, it's not really us, or did you decide? I mean, how did that come about?
So what happened was I had, as I said, the sequel to Finding Claire Fletcher. And I had the rights to Finding Claire Fletcher, and I thought I'll pitch them as a package deal. Like I said, I already had an in at Thomas and Mercer, and so I contacted them, and they were looking at them, and then But in the meantime, I was reading Bookature books like Angie Marson's. Oh my goodness. Robert Brinsley used to be with them, K.L. Slater. I mean, just everything that they were putting out, I was absolutely loving. And so it was kind of my dream, to maybe work with them. And so I pitched Finding Claire Fletcher and Losing Leah Holloway to them as well. They didn't think those books were a good fit for their list. Uh, but then they said, we would love for you to do a detective series. And what they wanted was a detective who has like a strong sense of justice, but is, a little bit damaged and flawed and has some problems. And uh, I really, I was into that idea, but I wanted to write it as a woman, a female detective. And so Bookature said, I had then sat down and kind of outlined my idea for Vanishing Girls, and I gave it to, who would later become my editor, Jessie Botterill, and she said, this is awesome. If you can write this book and a proposal for two more books in what would be the same series, get that to me, and then we'll talk. And in the meantime, while I was doing that, Thomas and Mercer came back and said, we love Finding Claire Fletcher and Losing Leah Holloway. We'd love to put them out. And so I went with them for that. And in the meantime, I'm writing the first Josie Quinn book. And I made sure that there would be no overlap between the two, so that when I went back to Bookature with what would become the Josie Quinn books, there would be no conflict with Thomas and Mercer. And so I don't know what would have happened if Bookature hadn't taken it, but I would have had this novel on my hands. But luckily they really loved it, so they took it.
Yeah, I would say luckily. I mean, you now you're on the 21st book in the series. They say it was a multi-million copy bestseller. So okay, so you wrote that first book. And yeah, so I know that Bookature's kind of their business model essentially is like publishing fast. Like they want to like a lot of books in kind of like the pipeline so that, you're not waiting another year until a
Yeah.
new book comes out. Are you a fast writer? I mean, what was that kind of difficult at first to have to essentially commit to doing? I mean, how many books are you writing now, like a year?
I'm writing three a year now. The first year I wrote four, and then I said I won't do that anymore. But I will say about Bookature is that they don't make you write.
Right, right,
You know,
right.
they ask you when you sit down to talk about the contract, they will ask you what you're comfortable with. And I didn't think I was a fast writer, but it's like my husband kind of pointed out, like you never stop.
Yeah.
You never stop. So just try it. And I did four the first year. That was a little bit too much for me. And so after that, I went to three. And like at any time, I can say to them, like, this isn't working for me. I want to pull back. But this is the pace that I like. It's because my husband's right. I never stop. And so even if I wasn't writing that third book, I'd still be writing. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
it
so
works.
so then are you I mean each book is there an average like word count length for each book in the Josie Quinn series?
Anywhere between 75,000 and 100,000. I was looking when I finished 21 because that was quite long and I was worried that it might be too long. I was looking at the word counts and I tend to come in the high 90s, honestly. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And is that something that just naturally progresses as you're writing it, or has you gotten to a place now, when you're outlining this, you kind of know like, okay, for this book, this is how long they need to be. Because I mean, I would agree that it wouldn't be good if, all these books are essentially 90,000 words and all of a sudden you come in with 150,000 words. I mean,
Yeah,
that would just, it just really probably wouldn't go over well.
right.
Um, so, I mean, like, how do you kind of maintain that level of, balancing that word count so that it doesn't go too short and too long?
I don't pay that much attention to the word count as I'm working, except that when I'm doing a first draft and I'll get to like 50,000 words and I'll go, oh, I only need like 25, 30,000, then the story will be over. But then what happens is I write 30,000 more words and I'm like, this is not over.
Right.
So my first drafts tend to come in really low. And then in the structural edits, I end up adding a lot more, well, I take out a lot of stuff and then I end up adding a lot more words. But for me, when I'm working, I just think about the, it's finished when the story is told. And so then if I have to go, like, I'm never too short ever. But if I have to go back and cut some things to make it shorter, that would be fine. But usually, I don't know if it's just from doing it for 21 books, but I usually come in right around the same place, and it just kind of happens naturally between the first draft and the structurals.
So obviously your 21st book just came out. You are currently contracted, you said, to do up to 30 to book 35, correct?
35, yeah.
That's a lot of books for me. Congratulations. I mean, that's
Thank you.
amazing. And I mean, it's
Thank
also a testament, obviously, to your writing and to your main character that, readers have stuck with it and the publisher has stuck with it that long. Because again, oftentimes with series, writers are lucky if they even, get past 10 books. So what do you think it just is the thing that really, has resonated then with readers that, you're at, number 21 and it's an instant bestseller?
Oh, it's Josie, 100%. If you asked me for writing advice 10 years ago, I'm not sure what I would have told you, but I could say now, character is king. I mean, if you don't have a character that people can relate to or root for or, you know, feel deeply for, whether they're frustrated with a character or they love them, um, then, I'm not sure, that your story will have legs, I guess. I mean, it's just character is so important. And I mean, and when I say that, I mean for a long series, because to me, and I say this having heard from my readers again and again and again with every single book, the thing that they are most invested in always is Josie. Is so I can write what I think is the most clever mystery and twist and plan all these like clues that I think are so awesome. And then when readers come back to me to talk about that book, it's just all about Josie.
Well, speaking of which, in the chat, in the comments, I should say, Karen asks, does Josie tell you what needs to be written?
No, but she does have kind of a mind of her own. So, a lot of times I sit down to write something and then she kind of takes over. So sometimes I feel more like I'm channeling her.
Um, so so like I guess like how do you manage to keep it fresh? Even after like five books. Do you keep like like kind of like a series Bible in terms of like, okay, book one, this is what we did, these were the characters, book two, so that if need be, I mean, or do you have a really great memory that you can just be like, oh yeah, this character, we saw them in book 17. I'm gonna bring it, you know what I mean? Like how do you like manage just to kind of keep it yeah, fresh?
It's hard. It's really difficult. I do have a series Bible. There's a lovely woman named Claire Milto who's been doing that for me for several years. And this past year, I had written a scene. I can't remember. I can't remember now. At the very beginning of it was either 20 or 21, but there's a scene in the beginning of the book. I call them the check-in scenes. So at the beginning of every book, you get a chapter where you're just kind of checking in with Josie and her normal everyday life. And then, she gets called to a case or finds a body or that kind of thing. And it was she had dropped spaghetti sauce. And so, like her kitchen looked like there was blood spatter everywhere. And then I was like, oh, I hope I haven't done this before. So I contacted Claire and I asked her, in addition to the series Bible, could she do novel recaps for me so that I didn't have to go like searching through every single book. And so she went chapter by chapter, and I have a separate document that it recaps every book chapter by chapter, so I can search it.
That, yeah, that's definitely helpful. Actually, that reminded me, I think I heard Mark Greaney talk about every time he has a new book come out, he basically merges all the PDFs of all his books. So if need be, he just does a quick search and find
Oh, that's a
in
great idea.
terms of yeah, so like the entire thing is there. So FYI,
That's a
that
great
might be something
idea.
to look into.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean I could see that there's definitely, just situations that you don't want to be, kind of like a deja vu type thing. So that's got to be tough, quite honestly. Just, so like a 21 books in and having, you're contracted for, at least another 10, what, dozen more? I can't
15.
do.
Well,
Yeah.
21 of it. Yeah.
Well,
14
how
maybe?
many books, like, so the 21st just came out. How many do you have, like, currently ready to go that are actually written?
Oh, I just turned in 22 the day before release.
Oh, okay.
So I'm doing structurals on that now. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not like you have a little bit of a cushion where you're like, oh, I've already have two or three already, good to go.
No, we have ideas for the future of the series. Like I have a document that has a bunch of ideas for future books, but sometimes I'll finish one book and depending on what happened in that book, I have to reshuffle those ideas just to because overall it just feels better that way. It makes more sense. So, but in terms of having, books that I've already written, I'm usually like the day before release, I'm finishing the next book.
Do you ever, okay, well, let's talk about then like just your writing process or like at least in terms of schedule. Are you somebody like every day are you writing
Oh
or
yeah.
are you and then okay, so if it's every is it every day like 7 days a week or do you give yourself a day off?
I try to take a day off, but my mind is always going. I mean, like my family will be like, they'll know like when I turned in a book, of course. And so if I show up in the living room with my laptop that next day, they're like, hey, come on, take one day. You can take one day.
So how long then are your writing days? Like usually like, on like today, like did you write any today?
I wrote a little bit this morning, and then we had some appointments we had to go to, and then I wrote like when we came home, I wrote a little bit, and then like I'm on here with you, and then when I get off, I'll probably write a little bit more. But I'll write a little bit in the morning usually, and then after dinner because somehow I write better. My flow is better in the evenings. I don't know why.
So do you average a certain like do you try to get in like so many pages, a chapter or two, so many words a day? I mean, is there some type of goal you try to, or is it just more like a day by day thing?
I used to have like word count goals and now and it just didn't work for me. So now it's more of I think of it more in terms of I want to get these two scenes finished today or I want to get, if I want to get to this section of the book that I know is coming up. And sometimes I get there and sometimes I get stuck and I have to walk away for a little while and let things percolate in the back of my mind and then I'll come back.
So you're up to book 21 right now. Um, and you're contracted and you set up to 35. Like, do you already have ideas of the next 10? Or is it one of those things where even, I mean, like, I guess, and I always hate that question, like, where do you get your ideas? But again, like, how do you, again, keeping it fresh, like, is it like different crimes that you're doing? As it, Vanishing Girls obviously had a very specific
Yeah.
plot to it. But then just, and then also the same thing too. Is it one of those things like, is it kind of like a Jack Reacher type thing where you can pick up, oh, I can just start reading it, book 17 and then I'll read book seven, or like really this should be book one on.
I will say, I think that you could pick up any one of them and just read it because the mystery in each book is completely independent of the rest of the books. My assistant and many of my readers are probably screaming right now that they don't think that you can do that. I will say that in book three, which is Josie's origin story, there's like a major, major, major spoiler. So if you read any book after that, you'll know you'll know what that is. But I don't think that it detracts at all from each individual book. I've had people start the series at 7, at 15, even at 20, and then go back and read them. Or I've had people that they read 8 and then they read 16 and they just kind of picked the ones that looked most interesting to them. So I always say if you are interested in continuity and you like to know what's going on in the series regulars' lives, chronologically, then yeah, read the series in order. It will mean more to you. But again, each book has its own independent mystery. You don't need to have read any of the others to get the most out of it.
Have you ever done or maybe considered, just for some reason, because I mentioned the whole Jack Reacher series, where occasionally, there will be like just one of the books happens to be kind of like a prequel book that like takes place before, the present day. It kind of like maybe shows more. I'm just trying to help you, finish out your contract of the 35 books. So,
We have a plan for a prequel. I had a pretty solid. I have a pretty solid premise for a prequel. But the issue for me was that I know that readers look forward to the new installment. And I had kind of loosely polled my long-term readers, like if the next book came out was a prequel, how would you feel? And they were all like, well, it would be cool, but really we just want to know what's going on present day. So I
mm,
I kind of like pumped the brakes on that because I don't want to disappoint my readers. We talked about doing it as a bonus book, like kind of
mm,
just doing the three a year and then just dropping that. But I write three books a year, so it's like when would I write a bonus book? So I
yeah.
don't know what will happen with that, but I've got an idea locked and loaded if the opportunity presents itself.
Do you ever find yourself wanting to just write like a standalone or just anything to just, you know, um, I mean, personally, I mean, more power to you, but just writing the same character for years and years and years, I just, I mean, obviously she's a great character, so it really works out. But after a while, I mean, do you ever just because I remember I was talking to a while back, I had interviewed Tess Gerritsen, and she had said one of the things that she had kept the Rizzoli and Isles series kind of fresh was that she would always kind of just go and write a standalone, just so that it kind of kept her a little sane too. And she basically was able to, the publisher let her do it because they just wanted to keep publishing more Rizzoli and Isles. So they were like, okay, you go write these other books that aren't going to sell as well, but at least kind of gave her more just to, just kind of keep the. I don't know. Like, do you ever kind of feel that way where you just kind of wanted to like, oh, it'd be nice to try something different?
Yeah, I don't have that.
That's good. That's
I
good. I
don't
mean, no, then like that's perfect.
like I have ideas for standalones. There's a book that it's kind of off genre that I've literally been working on since 2006. And when I say working on, I mean like three times a year maybe I open the document and I write a couple of paragraphs. Um, but I just don't I'm just like I'm happy with Josie. I'm fully, invested and immersed in her world and I'm satisfied with that. So I know a lot of writers have that frustration when they're writing series and they feel, bored and wanting to flex their creative muscles a little bit. But I think for me writing this series is challenging enough that it keeps me on my toes. So I don't really ever look elsewhere.
Yeah. Um, do you ever worry that something, because I recently read Vanishing Girls and it's a dark book. Like, do you ever worry at some point some of the crimes that you're dealing with that maybe it gets too dark, or you feel like in a way that like that's part of the appeal?
I think it's part of the appeal. I would say that I don't think many of the other books are quite as dark as that one. There might be one or two that rise to that level, but to me, it's just the nature of the genre. And um, some some writers are darker than others, and you know, I try to kind of keep a happy medium. I would say I don't have a lot of gore necessarily, and a lot of the violence takes place off screen.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, that's what you get for when you want to read crime fiction. I mean, that's what I read, and that's what I would expect if I cracked open a crime novel.
So what are some favorite crime novelists that I mean, like, I guess like when you have like a half hour of free time during your week, like who are you reading? Like what are you, like how are you spending your free time?
Oh my goodness, the list is so long. I would say, in the more recent years, my favorites are S.A. Cosby, Jennifer Hillier, Kelly Garrett. Um, I love Delia Pitts, so good. Um, read writers I've been reading for 20 years. Karen Slaughter, Lisa Gardner, Lisa Unger, Greg Hurwitz, the big guns. Chelsea Kane, Dennis Lehane. Uh, you know, those are like instant auto buys for me. And then, the newer writers, I know I'm forgetting, a lot of people. Then there's my somebody I'm actually friends with, Maddie Dalrymple. I love her books. Jane Kelly, I love her books. So it's like I'll read anything,
Yeah.
but I would say I know I'm forgetting somebody, but those are off the top of my head, my favorites.
What are you reading currently?
I'm not reading anything right now because of when I'm doing a first draft and like I'm just entering structurals on book 22, but it had a lot of problems in the first, I'm kind of like in this weird space between first draft and structural edits, and I can't read anything when I'm in that um, place. I can't read anything new. Like I read a Chelsea Kane book before I start each book. I can read stuff I've already read because that doesn't like mess with my mind and I know what's going to happen and I won't lose a day or two of writing because I can't tear myself away. So I'll read like a Greg Hurwitz book, a Karen Slaughter book, or a Chelsea Kane book that I've already, or Lehane that I've already read. But I'm not reading anything new right now because I can't kind of focus on both.
So writing wise, how would you say, I mean, from the girl from the 11-year-old girl who wrote her first massive novel to, the one you just wrote, the 22nd one that you turned in. Um, I don't know, what has really changed in terms of your writing? Like, if you could go back, to, a decade and talk to your younger self, is there any like advice you would give in terms of, how you approach the writing or the business or just, I don't know, anything like that?
Um, well, like at any point, I would have told my younger self, like, just don't try to do it spontaneously. You really need to study the craft in whatever way you can. When I was younger, I didn't really have a lot of money to, you know, buy books on craft or take courses or anything like that. But I would get books from the library on writing and that sort of thing. But I wish I think that I had studied and tried to study the craft and tried to hone my writing more seriously uh, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. That's probably what I would have told my younger self. Because every like now, I mean, I now I take courses. I'm still reading books. I'm becoming a better writer. And now I really look at the books that I love the most and try to deconstruct them and see, what can I learn from this as a writer and how can I improve my own writing, by studying this book or these books. And that's not something I consciously did as a younger writer.
Right. So when you're reading now, when you are picking up a new Hurwitz or Cosby or whatever, like, can you turn off that part of your brain where you're not really trying to look at it from an analytical standpoint, and it's more just like I would just want to be entertained, or do you just kind of find yourself being like, oh, I like how he switched perspectives here, or how he did the scene, in the scene transitions or whatever. I mean, like yeah, like how do you go about that? And the same thing in the comments we had. Karen asks, how long does it take you to typically read a book?
If read a book, it's very strange because most books I'll read in, 1 to 3 days. Some take longer, but that's only if I have something going on in my life that, infringes on my reading time. Uh, I try to read the first time for just entertainment, and it's usually fine. I'm usually really swept up, but like I just read an arc of Greg Hurwitz's upcoming book Nemesis, and it's just so like I'm reading it and it's so good. And I'm like dying to know what happens next, but I'm also like I'm reading the way he, as always, the way he masterfully does his action scenes and I'm like, "Oh, I have to remember to come back to this later and read it a few more times because this is so good and I think I can learn from this." So it's kind of like, well, put a pin in this. I'm going to read it a second and third time as a writer. So yeah, I try to do the first read through just as an excited reader. And then I will always come back though and read it, you know, one or two more times.
Great. And I don't know, did you mention in that she asked how long does it typically take to read a book? I guess it depends on, each book is a different length and you're probably busy with other stuff.
Yeah, yeah. It's 1 to 3 days unless like I've got a lot going on, and sometimes it'll be a couple of weeks, 3 weeks.
No. So, going back to the series, like, does it come down to just different types of crimes, or like, again, or do you maybe see something in the news and set that aside, being like, "Ooh, this could potentially be a good, mystery or crime to add"? I mean, like, how do you? Again, I always say like, where do you get your ideas? But again, to keep for a series like as long as this has been and as long as it will continue being, I mean, how are you? Do you keep a little bit of a notebook or maybe something on your phone or just, jot down ideas or like news clippings or anything, throughout the day or
The news is always great inspiration. But I watched the BBC course that Lee Child did, and one of the things that I remember most from that is he says plot is a rental car. Like in the crime fiction genre, I mean, my bread and butter is murder victims and missing people. I mean, it's almost always that. I think it is always that. So there's nothing new. So in that sense, like plot is a rental car. You're starting at the same point as, all of your thriller writer friends, with either a body or a missing person. That's what I do. I don't do heists or any of that kind of stuff. Um, so to keep it fresh is, a little bit more difficult because if you're always kind of starting with the same crimes, then you have to come up with something that makes it stand out. And sometimes it's something I saw in the news, but other times it's just me trying to, like put a few weird clues in there that don't seem to go together or like in book 5, I think it was, you have your dead body and they go into the woman's house and they find these 3 items hidden in the bottom of her sewing machine. And they don't go together. Like one's a belt buckle. I forget what the other two were, but and then Josie has to figure out where did these come from? What do they relate to? And then, you're digging and digging and digging from there. Sometimes it's like a what if for me, like what if this happened? What if that happened? Sometimes it's just a who was in this victim's life at the time that this happened, and what are the kind of psychological forces that led to this crime happening. And then from there, like a lot of stuff is just setting or what haven't we done before. Like I said to my husband the other day, um, I need a place where that's kind of like could be dangerous, where Josie could chase a suspect and they could possibly like fall or get trapped somewhere, but it has to be dangerous. And then I was like, we can't do a ravine, we can't do a cliff, we can't do an old mill. And I was going like through the whole series, like, we can't do any of these things. It was like 20 things. And he finally looked at me and said, I don't know, the ball pit at Chuck E. Cheese. Just like what's left. So yeah, it's hard to keep it fresh, but I kind of am always thinking like, what haven't we done? What haven't we seen? What are the motivations of the people behind the crime? Why are they doing this? Because to me, that's always the most compelling thing. And finally, like, it has to be something I'm excited to write. Because if I'm bored with it, the readers will definitely be bored with it. So somehow I have to find some element of the story or the setting or the clues or something of the crime that intrigues me. And then it's, I just go from there.
Right. So do you typically know the ending when you start a book, or are there times where you think you might know how you're going to end it, and then you might get surprised, like when things change as you're going, or is there a mix, is it a mix of like some books you do and other books you don't?
Yeah, I'd say most books I don't, because the last few books, my editor was like, listen, we need to talk about the ending before you start. Because I will sometimes turn in the first draft and I'm like with no ending on it, I'll get very close to it, but and usually it's not that I don't know how it's going to end. It's usually like a setting problem that I have. Because again, I don't want to keep repeating the same things. So sometimes it's very, very, well, sometimes rarely it's very, very, very clear. Most of the time, like I have a general idea. And then sometimes I get there and it's fine. And other times I kind of get stuck right before the big climactic scene and I have to go to my editor and talk it over before I can finish it.
Have you ever had to do like a major edit, like, the second third of a book? The editor is just like,
Oh,
this isn't going to work. You have to like redo the entire thing.
oh yeah. I think the worst one was book 10. I think I turned it in at 80,000. I took 40,000 words out and had to rewrite. So like almost half, yeah, half the book I had to rewrite. 13 was also kind of like that. I think 40,000, I probably ended up rewriting 50,000 words of that in the second round. So yeah, I've had a few that were just absolute beasts. I mean, just kicked my butt. Yeah.
Yeah. I noticed that you refer to the books by their numbers.
Yeah.
If I gave you a minute, could you go through 1 through 21 and list and remember all the titles
I could
for all the
remember the
books?
title. Yeah.
Do you come up? Do you come up? I mean, like, I guess because this is always kind of, I guess I always find it interesting, in terms of the marketing, like how often are the titles your titles, or it becomes, the publishers later like, we should, I mean, or I mean, I guess or sometimes does like maybe a title come first? I mean, like what's that process like in terms of, trying to determine the best marketable title?
I have nothing to do with it at all. I don't even suggest titles. I was always terrible at titles and I didn't like to have to come up with them. And so when we started the series, Bookature was like, I had initially made suggestions for the first three books that in hindsight were really not good. And they were like, well, we're going to do the titles. So they just tell me what the title is. And I'm like, okay.
Okay, well then let's talk about Josie. I mean, Josie Quinn, where'd that name come from?
Oh, that's a really funny story because in the first draft of Vanishing Girls, her name was Vanessa Sloan. And the publisher felt like that was too kind of like, well, what they said was it was too posh. And so I gave them a list of first names and last names that I could live with. And I said, you pick. And they came up with Josie Quinn. And I was like, oh, I like that. So yeah, that's what we went with. And it's the funny thing
Yeah, it's
is
great.
oh, I can't imagine her as anyone else.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So Vanessa Sloan. That's interesting. In the first book, were there any other I mean, does it ever happen too with certain character names that have to be changed for whatever reason, legal reasons? I don't know.
Usually it's only because I might have used too many characters whose names begin with the same letter or whose
Hmm.
names sound or look too similar on the page. So like if my editor is getting confused or my beta readers are getting confused because I have you know, Susan and Susanna or whatever, like you're reading and you can't kind of keep them straight. That's the only time I've ever had to change a character's name.
Yeah. In the comments, Dana says, and I think this might be a spoiler alert for people who don't, but it says Vanessa is her birth name, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
did get that name back.
So you did work
Yeah.
it in. You did
Yeah,
work
I
it
worked
in.
it in.
Very cool. So, so at this point, and I think I may have already asked this, and if and forgive me if you have, it's been a very long day, but so how many books out like do you feel confident right now where you're like, okay, I feel like this is going to be, I have stories for this, this, and this, or how far out would you say? Or is it only just like, next book, and that's it?
No, at least five or six books we've got ideas for. The problem, I mean, I have more ideas than that, but every couple of months I go back and I revisit those, and some of them that seemed like a great idea when I wrote them down, this next time I look at them, I'm like, I don't think this, has legs. I don't think this is going to work. And some I write down and I just kind of jot down a few words, and when I write it down, I don't think it's going anywhere. But then when I revisit it, it's like it just blooms into a full idea. But I would say confidently for the next five, I've got enough for, to do solid outlines.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Anybody in the comments have any other questions before? Because I think we're going to wrap it up. It's getting close to 8 p.m. here on the East Coast. I don't want to keep Lisa's because she has to get to writing. She has to work on she has to get to work on the next book. Do you end up like doing late nights, or do you try to just be in bed by a certain time?
No, I write better in the, at night. So if I'm really, really, really going, I'll write until I am falling asleep. Uh, but right now with the school year with my daughter, I do get up with her in the morning. Um, Probably don't have to, but I just do. And so I sometimes will go to bed early so I'm not suffering the next day, but I do tend to stay up pretty late.
Do you have like a specific place you like to write, or do you have like music you like to listen? I mean, like what's the environment when you're writing, or does that change sometimes book to book?
No, it's always my office now, and I have I mean, sometimes I'll write here at my desk, but most of the time, my dog likes to be there when I'm writing, and he likes to be up right against my leg. And so I had to buy this big chair that we could both fit in. And so I will sit in that chair, and he'll be like tucked against my right side, and we'll be under the blanket. And I have these flameless candles. So I kind of put the lights down low and have all these candles to kind of like set the creepy mood. And I listen to brown noise. And my friend Katie Metner, who is a really excellent romance writer, she bought me a brown noise machine. So I just come in here, I get into the writing chair with my dog, and I put the brown noise machine on, and I'm good to go.
What about research? Do you let research get in the way, or do you try not to let it? You know what I mean? Like, how much
Oh,
research are you typically doing then, like book
a
to
lot.
book?
The research is the most challenging part, honestly. Like I look at other writers, like romance writers, fantasy writers, and I'm like, you guys must just be, it just must be the best time. Like never having to worry about, can I do this? Can I do that? Is this going to be accurate? And I mean, it's like every little tiny thing I research. So it's a lot of like reading medical journals, internet research. Depends on how obscure the thing that I'm looking for is. I have two law enforcement consultants that I work with. One, he just answers questions throughout the first draft, and then I write the book. And then another one, she reads the books line by line and tells me, um, what I got wrong. And sometimes I will hop on a call with her during a first draft if the scenario is too complicated and I can't, figure out how to write it. I'll get on a Zoom call with her and we'll hash it out. Um, I've talked to attorneys, I've talked to medical examiners, I've gone out with search and rescue dogs on training days. I had gone to MurderCon in 2019. I think it was MurderCon in North Carolina at Searchy headquarters. They manufacture like crime scene equipment. And Lee Laughlin, who runs that, he runs the Writers Police Academy. He's really wonderful. He knows a lot of stuff, and sometimes I'll talk to him. He knows like every expert that you could possibly imagine. So sometimes I'll go to him and say, I need to talk to a latent print examiner, or somebody who's an expert in blood spatter or what have you, and he'll get me in touch with that person. And So it's just a constant, like every scene that I write almost, I have to think about uh, is this feasible? Is this authentic? Is it accurate? And I don't like to have to go back and change it because oftentimes the plot kind of depends on the procedure. So I try to figure that stuff out ahead of time and do the best I can writing the scene. And then, like I said, my consultant reads everything before it goes out to the public to tell me what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah. And I'm sure that despite no matter how much research you do, you'll still get some reader emails probably complaining about one thing
Yeah.
here and there. What
Yeah.
can you say, like, is there like the wildest complaint you've ever gotten from any of your books?
Um, it's just I'm trying to think. There was it wasn't in the Josie Quinn series, but there was a complaint in Hold Still, which was set in Philadelphia and set in the neighborhood that I lived in my whole entire life. And someone complained that there was not a street sign where I said it was. And I was like, I could just take a picture of it on my way to work. Like it's there. Um, so
Oh
it's the
my
funny thing to
goodness.
me is like the real life stuff is always the stuff that people don't believe. Um, and then another one was like, like nobody says to me like, oh, it's unrealistic that Noah fell off of a cliff and just landed on an outcropping. Like, totally fine, no problem with that. But at the end of, I think it was book 20, Josie burns herself in the kitchen and he puts her hand under cold water. And I got like a lot of messages about that it was not accurate. Which is like, I mean, that's great. But like, and I didn't know that. So if I get a burn, it's good to know. But it just cracks me up, the most kind of inane things that I'm writing that like really, could this really happen? Nobody ever questions that stuff. But it's like kind of the mundane day-to-day stuff that people always, always ding me on.
So I have more of a writerly geeky question. Because okay, so you're up to book 21 now in the series. Are there any other series the publisher does that has gone longer than 21 books that you know
Um,
of?
I think Angie Morrison's. I'm pretty
Jim
sure
Marston's?
she's ahead of me, I think, by
So
one book.
do you know, like, I mean, at what point did it really hit you and the publisher, like, oh, this is a character in a series where we could go an extra 10, 20 books? I mean, like,
Yeah.
like was it after book, two, three, four? I mean, like, was there a certain point where all of a sudden it just kind of, dawned on you guys that like, oh, we have something special here?
I can tell you book three spent 9 weeks on the USA Today bestseller list, and that was kind
Whoa,
of yeah, yeah.
9 weeks. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
And then somebody was like, "Do you think we can go 10?" And of course that was it. Yeah, and I think that was a huge turning point for the series. And then I don't know, I think just like by book, 8 or 9, when things were like there was no kind of fall off, like you would expect with a series, then it kind of became clear that we could probably take this pretty far. I mean, I'm always like kind of a pessimist. um, but the publisher, they're very data driven, so they're confident. So if they're confident, then I'm confident.
Fantastic. So, all right. If anybody else has any comments or questions, real quick. I mean, also, I would look later on Facebook. There is a lot of love. People are saying they love the books, and a lot of people are chiming in. Um, there was one other thing I wanted to say, and I completely. Oh, so the one you just turned in, is there any chance you can give a little bit of a sneak peek of what that one's about for
Oh
everyone tuning in or not? I understand if you can't. I understand
no,
if the publisher out there has an assassin that's gonna take you out
I
if you give any spoilers, but I don't know.
I can. I just think that readers might be upset with me.
That's okay. Do we
Let's
have
just
a title
say
yet for it yet, at least?
I don't have the title yet, but let's just say that Noah gets into a bit of hot water.
All right. Well, there we go. That's
That's
the
all I'm gonna say.
exclusive. So we have an exclusive. All right, perfect. So, where is a good place for people to find you online? Obviously, we're doing a Facebook Live right now. You have a big following on Facebook, but where else can people find you?
I would say if you go to my website, which is just www.lisareagan.com, like everything you can find everything on there. I tend to spend most of my time on Facebook because that's where all my readers are. So I have my author Facebook page, and then I have a readers lounge, which is a private group for, dedicated fans. And I would say the best place to be is Facebook because we do just a lot of giveaways there. Um, and that sort of thing. It's just a fun space for readers. And I do like a lot of author recommendations too, which readers love. So that's a fun
So
space.
this Readers Lounge, if someone wants to, be a part of that, how would they go about doing that?
I I can post it again on the Facebook page, but you have to just, you whatever the process is on Facebook to join the group, but you have to answer the questions because Facebook will auto reject if you don't answer the questions. So, like I'll have like people that I know personally, like my mom trying to join it, and she'll be like, I didn't answer the questions because, your mom. And I'm like, oh yeah, but you have to put something.
Right.
So you have to answer the questions and then it'll come through and somebody on my team will uh approve it.
Apps. Excellent. So, Lisa, thank you so much for making time. Congratulations again on the latest book on being a Amazon top 100 bestseller. That was both in the U.S. and the U.K., correct? Or is
Yeah.
it also anywhere else? Any other territories? Canada? Any of those?
Canada and Australia, I'm told. Yeah. Thank you.
Worldwide bestseller. Perfect. So, and thank you for everybody for tuning in. Again, later, Lisa, if you get it, I would go glance at the chat. Everyone was giving love for the series and in your writing. So, yeah. So we'll see you again, everybody. Bye.